Thanks for that introduction. It's great to be here at IFPRI. And when we initially talked about this, because this does have an international flair to it, thought I'd have something to add to the conversation because I was scheduled to monitor the presidential elections in Nigeria on Valentine's Day. They were supposed to take place. They postponed those till March the 28th, so I don't have my Nigerian experience to share with you, but I am intending to go March the 24th, I think, to Nigeria and be there for a little, right around a week to monitor the presidential elections. But we're talking about food, water, and energy nexus. My real understanding of this is really based more on the energy policy part of it, which is what I do at Colorado State University. I want to talk just a little bit about some things that I've done internationally to give you a sense that I think about these things and have actually lived some of these things. I went to Zambia. He didn't include this in his remarks, but when I came out of law school, I was actually a prosecutor for about 5.5 years, and after doing that 5.5 years, my wife and I decided to move to Zambia. We were Catholic lay missionaries, but we ran a nutrition center in the western province of Zambia in a very remote place, and we did it for 3 years. We actually took one of our oldest boy was already born. We had a son born there, and a son conceived before we came back, so we have all three kinds of kids, whatever that is. So anyway, we experienced this whole issue around both energy shortages, but also really significant drought and food shortages, and saw directly the impact. We were running a nutrition center, but a lot of the time we were there, we were working as part of emergency food delivery. About 30% of the kids under 5 years old were either seriously undernourished or in fact malnourished by International World Health, WHO definition. So we lived that part of it. I was the DA of Denver for about 12 years, and I became governor. And while I was governor in Colorado, we're a fairly arid state. We are a headwaters state. Every river in Colorado flows out of the state and somewhere else, with the exception of the Green River that makes this little 22-mile detour into the northwest part of Colorado, and then every other river is born in the state and flows out. And so as an arid state and a farm state, we had a lot of thinking that we were doing around water and water shortages in the West, and certainly energy policy was a part of that. Coming out of the governor's office, I did a couple of things. One, I founded this center at Colorado State University, and the purpose of this center is to work on energy policy. The other thing I did was I joined the board of the Energy Foundation, and the Energy Foundation does grant making to groups around the United States that are trying to work on clean energy policy, advancing clean energy policy. But we also have a China program where we do about $45 million in funding in China to try and advance clean energy. So for those of you aware about China, China burns half of the world's coal. So that's about 3.7 billion metric tons of coal a year that China burns, and the rest of the world burns 3.7 billion. China's probably going to get to about 4.5 billion. The reason I mention this is because the most important thinking about the intersection of food and energy and water really is related to climate change. You can't have a discussion about climate change without trying to understand the impact that climate change will have on food production, on water, on both sea levels rising, but as importantly for places like the arid West, but more importantly sub-Saharan Africa that are just very arid already. The climate impact on those are going to be significant. And one of the things that we believe is that we can really try and do our level best to understand energy policy and energy systems and their relationship back to the carbon load, the greenhouse gas load around the globe, and how that could over time have an impact. Scientists tell us that we need to try and cap the warming to 2 degrees by 2050. We're probably going to blow right by that. And that's unfortunate and sad. But I still live in real hope that we as a globe can get control of this, and it's partly why we work in China, but certainly why we do our own work in the United States. If you look at who's loaded the most greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, who's had the greatest carbon load by volume, it's the United States. We currently are not the biggest carbon load annually, that's China. And actually, China surpassed us sometime in the early part of the new millennium and has continued to go in the direction of increasing their carbon load, while the United States has decreased its carbon load over time. I think we're going to get to a 17% drop in emissions from our 2005 levels by 2020. The President just signed an agreement with China that by 2025, both the United States and China would meet certain targets on reducing its emissions. With our work in China, I think that's a stretch goal for China to get there. But the good news is they have a variety of things happening where they're really trying in earnest. And for China, it's so much more probably about public health issues than it is about climate change or their greenhouse gas load, because they have very serious public health issues that are part of their coal-fired generation emissions having impacts in cities that have millions and millions of people and are considered small by comparison to other cities in China. So, so there's a real reason to pay attention to energy and to energy systems. If you look at the developed world, or those countries, even the United States plus the BRIC countries, you can understand that there's a lot to be gained by trying to transition energy systems. But the United States has to lead that conversation, in part because we built an economy, we built a middle-class economy using coal-fired generation, and we're responsible for so much a part of the problem. People who are experiencing this problem around the globe from climate, many of those places, they're not responsible for it at all, or if they are, it's minimal by comparison to the United States and to now China. And so it's really important for the United States to try and lead this effort in understanding this transition to energy. So very quickly, I don't have a lot of time, but let's look at the United States Congress and understand that in looking at the Congress, there's not much happening other than really a debate about whether climate change is happening, whether it's caused. It's the last political institution in the entire globe to actually still be debating this proposition. And so for us at the Center for the New Energy Economy at Colorado State University, we accept that Congress has been unable to move on a comprehensive energy policy that you could consider sort of advancing a clean energy agenda, and with that, look for other ways to try and understand how America can be part of this transition and how much that transition can translate to other places around the globe. China, the Soviet Union, or Russia, Soviet Union, places in Western Europe that actually in many respects are ahead of us, but have had some struggle with different parts of their clean energy agenda, like the carbon market in the European Union. And so how much of it really translates? So let me just tell you about a couple of things that we've done. One, the President of the United States asked me a couple of years ago to convene stakeholders in issues around renewable energy, energy efficiency, alternative fuels for vehicles, business models for utilities in the 21st century, and how that transition needs to happen in order to have a clean energy agenda. And the final one was rulemaking around natural gas. And so we've done that. I'll recommend to you our report. It's called Powering Forward, and it really is about how the administration, the Obama administration, could advance a clean energy agenda without Congress acting. There's a variety of really important things that federal agencies can do, that the White House can do, commissions appointed by the White House that operate independently but still have the ability, if they care to help advance this clean energy agenda. And you can see many of those things happening. Some were already in place and actually happening before we made our recommendations. Some of them follow from our Powering Forward report, and it's really sort of the President's climate plan that he announced June the 25th of 2013. This is really the policy support in many respects for that climate agenda. So that's the number one thing that we've been doing at our center. The number two thing is working in the West with the EPA rule, the Environmental Protection Rule. It's called 111D. Sounds a little arcane, but it's probably the crown jewel of the President's climate plan, because it looks at how we reduce our emissions. If you use 2005 levels, reduce them by 30% by 2030. And what they did was propose a rule last June and gave each state sort of what we call a building blocks approach to how to get to the reductions that are going to be required for that state. Not all states have to reduce equally. It wasn't across the board cut. It was more surgical on the part of the EPA. And we're working with 13 states in the West about, well, first of all, we commented back to the EPA when they asked for comments about issues that were common to Western states. 10 out of the 13 states signed off on that letter. But you can imagine this has a lot of political controversy around it. There are a variety of Republican and Democratic governors whose states are participating. So 8 Republicans, 5 Democratic governors, and we've been able to hold them together around a constructive conversation. It's Chatham House rules. We can't really talk about what it is, but it's different than sometimes the conversation that you hear where there may be a press conference or a State of the State message and the governor's talking about the EPA. There's a lot of people that don't like it, but we managed to convince these governors that they need to think about how this could become a hedge strategy where they're at the table, and if they lose their litigation, they can actually be part of really trying to understand how to implement this rule. This is the crown jewel, as I said, of the Obama administration. It's important for the states to do this. We're not the only group doing this in the United States. The Nicholas Institute at Duke University is working with southeastern states. There's a group called Great Plains Institute in the Midwest that's working with Midwestern states. Here in Washington, D.C., the Georgetown Environmental Law Center and Vicky Arroyo are working with, their group is working with a variety of states from around the country, but they have Reggie principally involved, and California. California is in our convening as well, so some states are going to multiple convenings. And I only mention that to say, as much as, if you're like a citizen of Paris and you want to know what's happening on energy policy in America, you usually only read about what the United States Congress is not doing. So I've actually traveled a little bit and spoken around the world about things that the states are doing on energy policy, and foreigners are stunned at some of the things that are happening. There are 220 million Americans that live in a state with a renewable energy standard. It's even more than that who live in a state with an energy efficiency resource standard. I signed 57 different bills into law in Colorado that were clean energy bills of one type or another. But we really believe that there's a variety of things happening at the subnational level, at the state level, and that it's important for people to pay attention to it. So the Powering Forward thing we did for the White House, this work we're doing with the 13 Western states, and then generally working with energy policy, working with the energy policy decision makers at other states around the country, we're doing as well. This absolutely translates to the things that we need to focus on and assist with in other parts of the world. And again, some of those places don't have a big carbon load, but they can be part of this transition. I lived in Africa at a time where landlines were pretty much the only thing going, 1987 to 1990, and it took 6 times to have a 5-minute conversation with someone in America because the service was just so poor. Africans, sub-Saharan Africa, has largely been swept by the cell phone. Good or bad, right? But no, it's good. It's really good in many respects. But there's 1.3 billion people who don't have access to energy. And there's a variety of things we're doing in the United States, both on the policy end, but as importantly on the technology development end and on the finance end, including the microfinance end that has a translation to other places, not just sub-Saharan Africa, but other places around the country. We had a luncheon discussion and talk about microgridding in Africa. And there are places that we worked, I had 47 Bush depots that were out of this little provincial capital that I worked out of. But as far as, 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers away was probably the furthest one, 47 different ones. And I just think about the possibilities of distributed generation solar, even on thatched rooftops to bring electricity to homes that have none, and how important that would be, and really how you can address water scarcity issues actually through greater electrification of rural parts of the developing world, and what an important thing that is for us. So we call this thing we work on the new energy economy, and it's really about trying to transition from central power stations that are fossil fuel generated to clean energy that might be centrally generated, but also could be distributed generation, and also that really takes maximum advantage of energy efficiency. That's all part of it. And we say, it's about energy, but it's also about economic development. We've really been clear that we have to think about how the economy in that area develops as we do this. It is about addressing environmental challenges. subset of that would be public health challenges, if you think about China. But really, you can address the environmental or the public health challenges and do the other as well, in large part. Not all, it's not totally synonymous, but in large part. And then finally, it's about equity for the people who ultimately pay for the electricity. And we know that that's important. We know that there's a variety of things we could do, not just in this country, but around the globe, where you could really electrify places, but you would build that out on the backs of people who are very poor, or what we might consider lower middle income. Those folks, you know, they deserve a quality of life. They have a lot that we can do a lot to engender a quality of life for them, and do it in part paying attention to their own sort of equity and justice issues around electricity. So that's the work that we're doing at Colorado State University. I got my little 3-minute sign 3 minutes ago. So I'm going to stop. I get to be a part of this conversation later, but it really is an honor to be able to be with you. Thank you.